The Rebel and the Peacemaker, the incredible true story of Mary and Charles Bagot. A relationship takes work, compromise, and trust in one another. But in order to make a special relationship, a little more diplomacy may be required. This is the story of Charles and Mary Bagot, the gossips of Regency, England, and they had when they had more than their fill. A marriage that was originally the toast of high society was one marked with scandal and adultery, and basically to tell us more about Regency goings on is acclaimed historian Geraldine Roberts. Geraldine, good morning to you.
Good morning, Giles.
Good to have you with us. We tend to Bridgerton notwithstanding, we tend to sort of overlook sort of Regency England, don't we? So it's good to see it back in focus with your book.
I love the period because it's so much fun. There's so much glitz and glamour. But under the surface, there's also some very powerful stories going on. And my work always starts with the glitz and glamour and then eases the reader into the more powerful stuff.
So basically nothing's really changed over the centuries, has it? It all starts with influencers and people on the social medias, and then it all goes downhill rapidly.
No, absolutely. The power, they were the power couple of the time, and they were famous for their scandals. But then, they turned their lives around and they became famous for their diplomacy.
So tell me a little bit about what period we're talking. If nobody's got the clue when we're looking at it with the Regency, are we talking 18th century, 19th century? What are we looking at?
We're talking about the early 19th century, so before the Victorians came along, and life became very serious. It was kind of the last hurrah for people who like to have fun. So this is like basically, this is the sort of Napoleon, just after the Waterloo and Napoleonic age. We're looking at Vanity Fair and William Makepeace Thackeray and all that sort of stuff. Yes, it's exactly that. It's that period, the Napoleonic Wars.
So who are they then? I mean, how do they make their entree into sort of society life, as it were?
Well, Mary was the one who was famous. She was the niece of the Duke of Wellington. So naturally, when she was misbehaving, it caused embarrassment to the family. And Charles was just an amiable gentleman, but he was a bon vivant, which I think is something you can identify with. He liked to work hard and play hard, but he had this burning ambition to do good in the world. So, between them, they were quite a force to be reckoned with. They were a very dynamic partnership.
I mean, when they if she's the niece of the Iron Duke, presumably you would think that she would be sort of closeted, and and they would keep sort of reins on her.
Well, I think she was the eldest in the family, and after she misbehaved, they kept a closer eye on the younger ones. But there were always, these big houses, there were always opportunities to sneak around. There were always opportunities to sneak someone in the back door, which is what she did. So
what are the sort of the first hints of scandal that will become, the gossip, which will become the salacious conversations of parlour rooms from Bath to Tunbridge Wells?
Well, I mean, sex, drugs and rock and roll has always been around, and it kind of was the Regency version, which was waltzing and lots of partying, lots of champagne, and infidelities, illegitimate children, that kind of thing. But
at the same time, they have to keep up a sort of like a stiff upper lip and sort of keep up appearances, even though they each know that they're off gallivanting and cavorting.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it wasn't so much that it was deliberate. I think it was more, the man trying to establish his career and not being around very much, being abroad in diplomatic service, his wife being at home, and just growing apart. It wasn't something that happened. It wasn't planned. Yeah, it just happened.
So you can have your mistresses, or you can have your Regency toy boys, Regency rough stuff, if you like. So they're everybody's sort of getting up to no good and having a lovely time. However, there is a particular that they actually go too far. Now, how do you go? I mean, this should be a subtitle. How do you go too far in Regency England that you get banished to the colonies?
Well, as long as you keep everything private and you don't parade your lovers in public and rub people's noses in it. But also, there were strict codes of conduct. If a woman had a child out of wedlock, usually that child had to be given away. The woman was punished for that misdeed, and husbands were meant to keep their wives in check. But that didn't happen on this occasion. Charles was actually a very forward-thinking man, and he didn't punish his wife. And because they didn't comply with the codes of conduct at the time, they were banished. It was actually either, comply with what happens or go. It was a bit like being cancelled.
I mean, who was doing the banishing then? Who was saying was it society in general? They would never be able to hold a sort of another society party again, and they thought, well, we better get out of here. Or did was there word from a relation, or was the regent himself appalled by this behaviour?
Well, I think no one would employ Charles. He was seen as someone who wasn't very manly. He couldn't keep his wife in check. And so he couldn't get a job. And the only job on offer was the most, unforgiving job on the diplomatic circuit, which was British ambassador in Washington. So that it was that job or no job. So they took it.
How things haven't changed over the years. Who wants the ambassador's job in Washington? Not you, Mandelson. Be quiet. No, but you see
absolutely. But you see, in those days, I mean, the sea voyage to Washington took 6 weeks. It was a God-forsaken place, so far from home, and now it takes 3 days to get to the moon. Washington really was like a different world. And Washington, at the time, there was no infrastructure. It was essentially a swamp. They were having trouble building Washington because the terrain was so difficult, and nobody wanted the job because British troops had just marched in and burnt down the only 2 buildings that were there, which was the White House and the Capitol. So nobody wanted to be in Washington after that happened. So the tensions were really high. It was a dreadful time for Anglo-American relations, and that's why nobody wanted the job. And
yet they get out there, and perhaps because they are outcasts and they think, well, we might as well just go for it, they make a resounding success of it.
Yes. Because they were both gritty and determined, but they also had a natural flair for diplomacy. It was a time when the diplomatic service didn't have any kind of infrastructure. There were no embassies around the world. Washington didn't even have any buildings, never mind any embassies. But Mary managed to secure one of the only detached buildings in the town, and from there she hosted these wonderful parties that people wanted to attend. And that they sent congressmen from all over the country gathered there, and Mary just repeated the message: is let's forget about past turmoil and try and be friends, which actually was very effective. And Charles decided he would introduce a new style of diplomacy. He would break from tradition, which was basically who could shout the loudest would win the argument. And he decided, his plan was simple but completely original, which sounds crazy today, but he decided he would treat the Americans as gentlemen. Basically, he would be polite to them. And, he introduced a new style of diplomacy, which we now call win-win diplomacy, where, rather than shouting at your opponent, you actually both left a meeting with, mutually acceptable outcomes. And it really was very groundbreaking at the time.
Presumably, previous to that, it had been a very sticky position to have, because obviously, as you said before, we are in the situation where America is newly independent. They're feisty, to put it mildly. And they might look at the Brits in the same sort of filter that Mel Gibson has every time he does a bleeding film, for example.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And, Britain had been ruling, the United States, and they hadn't quite got their heads around the fact that they were no longer ruling over there. So their whole attitude to the Americans was, you still listen to what we say. And the Americans were actually even more hard-nosed, because they were trying to assert their independence, almost like a teenage child growing up. And that's why, up until, the Baggots went out 40 years after the War of Independence, and still that, they were not able to break through, the impasse. And it really was very important that they did, because the economies of both countries were suffering. They needed to find a way to continue trading with each other and, to get on.
So, I mean, was it just this sort of breath of fresh air and the fact that they were, so approachable, I suppose, and so if you like, level-headed and kind of normal, but also fun? Was that the thing that won them over then?
No, absolutely. I mean, he went out there, and in 3 years, he resolved all the outstanding issues that had been plaguing Anglo-American relations for 40 years. Everything was settled in one big, all-encompassing treaty where give and take was needed on both sides, and from then onwards, they established what we what they called at the time friendly relations, and which, developed into the special relationship, that emerged, over the coming years. How did
sort of Whitehall take this? Because obviously, or the king, because obviously at this point they've been sent over there as a punishment, and gadzooks, they're pulling this one off. How dare they? They're supposed to be, at least have caught some horrible disease from a Washington-based mosquito.
Well, no, they were absolutely delighted. Everyone in Parliament was saying, "Oh, it was my idea to send them. Oh, it's my idea to send them." So everyone was claiming, the credit for it. And everybody was thrilled on both sides of the Atlantic, because it was, friendship is not just about, oh, we want to be friends with you. Friendship, there are always underlying motives. And the motive in this instance was money, because, the economies of both countries were in turmoil, and they had to keep trading with each other. They were the biggest trading partners. America, the British market was the most lucrative for America, and vice versa. So, friendship isn't just about, isn't it nice to be friends? There's always underlying motives.
So did they stay there for the rest of their careers? I mean, did they make it back to the UK eventually? And how did this one, or did they stay over there for the rest of their natural lives?
Well, they only stayed for 3 years, because it was such a difficult posting. They'd had to leave their children behind. And it was quite torturous, which is another reason people didn't want the job, because it was such a high cost to the family. But they were kind of hoping that they would get a cushy embassy somewhere nice like Florence when they came back. But they were then sent to Russia. They were a victim of their own success. Russia was the next most difficult posting on the diplomatic circuit.
Right.
And then they were sent to Russia, and they had to deal with war in Europe and stopping the mighty Tsar at the time, who was a very difficult
Which Tsar have we got at this point?
It was Tsar Alexander,
right,
who was very unpredictable. One day he'd want one thing, the next day he'd wanted something, and it was their job to neutralise him and to stop war in Europe, because he had this mighty army poised and ready to plunge Europe into war, and it was their job to talk him out of it, which they did manage to do. They did have, because they were victims of their own success, and they did have some difficult postings.
This is remarkable, because these sort of people should be celebrated. They may have gone and dealt with those ungrateful colonials before, and that's as you said before, it's a difficult posting. They win them over, and then they go over and deal with the unpredictability of the Tsars, and manage to sort of, and because they have a huge army, etc., etc. I mean, how come we never hit? Very few of us know about this couple.
I think because there are so many amazing people in history, and one of the challenges as an historian is actually finding the material to write a book.
Yeah.
So when I like to write about women in history, and so to actually find letters written by women is really unusual. So when I came across Mary's diaries and Mary's letters, I felt, wow, this is an amazing story. This is a Regency woman who loves to have fun. Her letters are just full of life and fun. Someone I want to write about. And then to discover that she's been to America, she's been to Russia, she's been this huge influencer on the world stage. I thought this is definitely something, but just finding the material to work with is what's difficult, really, which is why so many women are forgotten in history.
So were you aware of her before you found the letters, or was it the other way around? And how did you find the letters themselves?
Well, I was aware of her before because my first book is called The Angel and the Cad, and the cad in the story is a very wild and reckless person who happened to be her brother.
Right.
So I came across her letters when I was researching my last book. I came across the letters she sent her brother, and I just really loved them. And I think after my last book, I thought never again, because it was such hard work to actually write a book of nonfiction, going through letters and real material. But then I kept thinking about her. I kept thinking, oh, she is someone I do want to write about. So, a couple of years went past, and I embarked on this, on this next book.
And were they in the National Archive? I mean, where did you actually find them, or did somebody hand them down to you? Because it's always fascinating to get that first person perspective on it. Because we tend to think history is the grand sweep of things, and it's, as I said before, it's the Boston Tea Party, or it's Peter the Great or something, or something happening in Muscovy. But it's actually that sort of went out last night and certain Edmund got terribly drunk and vomited over a chambermaid or something like that.
Well, I was lucky enough to be granted access to the family archive in Levens Hall. All the Bagot papers are in the family archive, preserved. So I was very lucky to get access to that. But even then, the papers were literally could fill an entire room. Charles Bagot's diplomatic papers from America, Russia. Then he was in the Netherlands, Belgium, Canada. They could fill an entire room. So very early on in my research, I decided that I would stick with the private papers, the private letters, the issues closest to their hearts. And, that made my job a lot easier. As I said, Mary's diaries are just important historical records of what happened in America at that pivotal moment in history. Sort of in Washington emerging out of the mud to become the US capital. And her letters are, a lot of fun. But Charles was very emotionally astute, and his letters span from his school days literally to his deathbed. He was still writing to people on his deathbed, and his letters are just very moving. He really does wear his heart on his sleeve, and talk about all his hopes and dreams and fears. So, yeah, a very powerful story on a personal level, as well as on, on the world stage. And
on a personal level, did they sort of slow down as they got more mature, or did they age disgracefully, as we all should?
No, well, you see, but by the time they got into retirement, Queen Victoria was in power, so all the wild parties had kind of stopped.
Oh my goodness, those darned Victorians.
They spoiled everything.
They
didn't
do,
they?
and also they also spoil how we write about history. That's the other problem with the Victorians, as you will no doubt back me up on this one, Geraldine.
Well, I think, I was taught the Victorians in school. I didn't hear about the Regency period when I was at school because, they were, my school were trying to turn out very nice young ladies. So we were told this is how people are meant to behave. So it was lovely to discover that, people did misbehave before the Victorians.
What are you hoping that apart from the fact that you can misbehave, what are you hoping that people are going to take from your book, The Rebel and the Peacemaker?
What I'm really hoping, there is a very powerful message behind this story. I feel that, there's never been a greater need for good diplomacy, in our war-torn world. I really hope that this story will, send a message of peace and harmony into the world and demonstrate that diplomatic solutions can be found. ordinary people, just to give them hope and inspiration. And I'm not expecting Donald Trump to read it or anybody else, any world leaders, but if they do, I hope they take something from it.
Let's be honest with it. We're not expecting Donald Trump to read, no anything else. So anyway, but this is the point. The book is called The Rebel and the Peacemaker, the incredible true story of Mary and Charles Bagot. Listeners, if you go to our own virtual bookstore and click on the rather attractive front cover, then it'll be winging its way to you by a well-known South American river-based firm. But Geraldine, if people want to follow you online, say nice things, or find out how to throw the ultimate Regency party, where can they find you? Is there a website? Do you do social media? Where can they find you?
Yes, my website is www.geraldineroberts.com. So my name.
Marvellous. Well, the book is called The Rebel and the Peacemaker. It's by the brilliant Geraldine Roberts, who's here today. Geraldine, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Giles, for inviting me.